Alrighty, we're live. Back on another SitRep. Welcome to the SitRep for today. It is the 29th of June, 2023. We're halfway through the year. I've been on holidays up in the northern half of Australia for about a week or so, and I'm back in the cold, back at work, back in a hotel room, as those of you who are watching the video of this can see. Sitting in a hotel room, about to go to work today. Thought I might bang out a quick sit rep for y'all to just check in, see what's going on in the world. Because there's some fun stuff going on. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world at the moment. Not everything we need to worry about. So there's a lot of stuff that I've kind of skipped over. I'm just going to touch on some things that really piqued my interest in the last week or so. Some of the newer stuff. And kind of leave a whole heap of things untouched, like... apart from right now, I'm probably not going to mention any submarine accidents or anything like that because I don't really give a fuck, to be honest. Could not give a shit about some rich people going in a shitty sub and dying. I mean, I care about people dying, obviously. That's never good. But somebody started talking to... I was actually doing a teaching course at the time. Somebody started talking about it, and I was like, what? I'm sorry, what? What are you talking about? And they had to explain to me what it was all about. I totally missed that one. I was concentrating on other things. Obviously, the big news for geopolitical sort of space stuff over the weekend was what happened with the Wagner Group and Russia. For those of you who didn't catch that one, Wagner Group was a private military company that's been one of the main forces of the Russian push into Ukraine. And there's been complaints over the last couple of months from their leader about being undersupplied. Well, they didn't turn tail, they turned themselves around and started marching on Moscow, allegedly. A lot of these reports are coming directly from Western media, who were obviously very excited. They were frothing at the mouth that, like, oh, the collapse is happening, the coup is happening, Putin's about to be outed by his own forces. And they marched on Moscow. They didn't get to Moscow. They stopped before then and just basically did another 180 and said, okay, return to your bases, it's all done. Very interesting, suspicious things. I've watched a number of things. I've read a couple of reports on this of varying degrees of what people are saying happened here in this space. I'm going to reserve judgment. I think, this sort of stuff will come out in the wash. Yeah, whatever it was, I think it might have been probably more orchestrated than people think. Not just a force going rogue and trying to overthrow Putin. But the net result is, I think it looks like it's going to be a solidification of power with Putin and increased forces. Those forces that were private military forces are now going to be pushed into or absorbed into a more nationalistic force, i.e. the military, the Russian military. So maybe a net result win for Putin. Hard to tell, though. There's obviously larger things that have happened there, and the image that it projects as well is a big thing. But I think the coming days and weeks will show what that actually means for the Ukraine conflict and their touted counteroffensive. Anyway, is that enough about that stuff? I feel like that's enough about that stuff. Let's talk about some other things. Let's talk about... Here's the thing that I wanted to start off with today, because it's about Australia. Sorry, no, I lie. I will go back quickly to this conflict because I've got a couple of stories here that are of import. Once again, Ukraine is coming out. Zelensky's actually coming out, and he's saying, hey, Russia's going to attack the nuclear power plant there, Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. It's going to be a huge thing. It's going to be a nuclear event, blah, blah, blah. All this sort of he said, she said sort of stuff, all this kind of like, is this a false flag? Is this an actual attack? Where we don't know what the truth is going on here, but, that N-word is being bandied around, nuclear, by the way, for those who don't know what I mean by it when I say the N-word. In kind of response to this, we had Lindsey Graham and, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Blumenthal? I think that's how you pronounce it. Any Americans want to help me out here? Who's a senator. They're on two sides of their little spectrum in the US, here being Republican and Democrat. And they've come out and said, look, bipartisan resolution declaring Russia's use of nuclear weapons or destruction of the occupied Zaporozhye nuclear power plant in Ukraine to be classified as an attack on NATO, which then they spelt out would require the invocation of NATO Article 5. For those of you who haven't told me to, for those of you who haven't listened to me talk about what Article 5 is before, or if you just don't know, you haven't heard much about NATO, Article 5, that's an article that basically says any attack on a NATO nation has to be treated as an attack on all NATO nations, i.e., if, for the sake of argument, an alleged terrorist flew an alleged plane into alleged towers in New York City, that's an attack on American soil. They can pull, look, this is Article 5. All NATO forces now need to follow us into a war, and we're going to take that war into Afghanistan. So that's how Afghanistan kind of went down, for people who don't know. That's why we had a whole heap of European nations in NATO. Why was Australia there? Well, we're a really good buddy of US, and US is like, yo, we're going to go in a fight. And Aussie's like, hold my beer, let's do this. That's how that all works. So you can see here what they're pointing out is, hey, Zelensky's saying, got credible evidence that Russia's going to attack Zaporozhye. And they've just come out and said, look, the US has basically said, if you do that, you attacked the US. You have attacked the US, so we will respond in kind. And we know how the US responds with all-out war. So right now, we're kind of teetering on that level again. This is just yet another part of the noise, but that noise is pretty important. Like, I get it. It's background noise and it's annoying and it's a lot of stuff, but this is nuclear war that we're talking about here, so it's kind of important. Anyway, the main thing that I got out of this is, if you want to make some money right now, start investing heavily into US military industrial complex type companies. Your Raytheons, your Boeings, all those kind of guys, they are frothing at the mouth right now. I imagine, like, come on, somebody fire a shot, so they can wheel up their money making, their billion trillion dollar industry. All right, enough about that stuff. Let's talk about stuff in Australia. This one, this is about a cash system in Australia. Westpac unveils major changes to debit cards, including $1,000 withdrawal limit. So this was actually, I saw this from a US source, and they said Australian bank is limiting withdrawals to $660 or $70. And I was like, what? That's pretty low. And then I did the calculation. I'm like, oh, actually, US, they're talking about US dollars. That's $1,000 Australian. Not that many people are actually pulling out $1,000 cash, and that's what they found. They said they did a survey, and they said 72% of Australians were seen as low cash users, under $1,000. And I'm inclined to believe that, to be honest. However, I think it's still a disturbing trend of where this is going. This is the first step to going cashless, where they start limiting cash. This is anecdotal, but this is an actual event that has happened and is still happening. Lebanon. So I did a job, not in Lebanon, outside of Lebanon, but a Lebanese dude came over and was working this job with me in the Middle East in 2020. Yeah. And he was talking about what the situation was in Lebanon, and they limited it. They started limiting the amount of money that people could take out of banks. Then they dropped it from 1,000. Like, I can't remember what they initially did, but they dropped it to, essentially, he said, you could get, as an average person, you could probably get 200 US equivalent from a bank a week. As a business, as he said he could sometimes squeeze out 400, but that was about it. That's all you can get. And they had riots at the banks, but essentially they ran out of money. They're saying, look, we got no money. We can't do this. We have to limit the money that people take out of banks, so you can only take out this much cash. So people couldn't just go, like, if you're a millionaire, it didn't matter. If you were someone who earned $200 a week, or somebody who earned $80,000 a week, it didn't matter. Both of you could only take out $200 a week. So it's kind of like this disturbing thing where I'm like, this is a warning sign. What I think this sorry, let me take a step back. For those who don't know who aren't Australian, Westpac, we've got 4 major banks in Australia, the big 4, right? And they like dominate the market by a long way. Westpac is one of those big 4. So Westpac is saying, look, we're going to limit $1,000 cash withdrawals, and also off memory, I don't have it snapped here, but I think it was, maybe I do have it snapped. 10,000. I think it was $10,000 limit on moving money. So like making a purchase on your card. So not physical cash now, but they are putting a limit, which is a pretty normal thing, right, for banks. But they're just putting a standardized limit. They're just saying, hey, here's our limit now. All right, that's not a big deal. You can go on, you can log on to a bank and say, hey, I want to increase my limit to 20,000 or 50,000. You know, if I'm moving a lot of money around, blah blah blah. So it's not that big of a deal, but this is just a bit of a warning sign. That's what I'm reading here. I'm going, okay, this is a bit of a warning sign that they're kind of testing the waters, and they're also putting it out there. What Westpac is doing, I believe, is they're looking at what's happening in the US at the moment. They're saying, hey, Signature Bank, SVB, what happened was people smelled blood in the water, freaked out, and started pulling out their money. And when they did that, banks do not have all the money that they say they have. All right, they've got theoretical money. They don't have cash, which is made up money anyway, but they don't have that cash. So if everyone went to Westpac right now, every Westpac user, and said, I want my cash, Westpac would fold. They would do what Signature Bank and SVB did, and they would say, we're fucked. We don't have this money. Australian government, help us out. And then us, the taxpayers, would have to foot that bill. Well, what they're doing here is implementing things to try and avoid that happening already. Or at least this is my take on it. They're going, all right, we don't want to go down that path. We don't want to end up like that. So we're going to put these limits in now. On top of that, they're also, I believe, we'll see those limits start to come down. And the amount of money that people can actually pull out at any given time will decrease, as the likelihood of central bank digital currencies and banks using digital currencies increases as well. So be warned, Australians. The disturbing thing about it is if an emergency happened and I was like, right, any sort of emergency, a personal emergency for me, and I'm like, fuck, I need to go pull out 5K in cash right now. I don't know. Let's say a family member of mine gets kidnapped and I've decided to pay the ransom, and that ransom is 5K. So I go and pull out that 5K. Well, I don't go pull out that 5K. I can only get 1K out. That's the kind of disturbing thing to me. Certainly, if there's any sort of emergency that happens and the EFT system goes down, which it happens a lot, you're going to need to use cash. Well, if I need over $1,000 in cash at that point, maybe I need to buy fuel and water and food and all that sort of stuff. I can't get it. So for the prepping perspective on this one, which is what I try and tie everything back to, what's the real prepping perspective is maybe you want a bit of cash on hand. Maybe this is the sort of thing where you go, maybe have a little bit of cash stored away, however that looks for you, however much that looks for you. I know a lot of people look at this and go, $1,000, it's like, I don't even have $1,000 in my bank account. This doesn't affect me. But this is the sort of stuff that, just as a warning, as a reminder, maybe have a little bit of cash squirreled away somewhere just in case of an emergency, because you may not be able to access it. All right, let's jump into food stuff now. And there's a couple of things here that are going on around food sort of sphere. I'll start off with the Aussie stuff here. Again, these stories were sent to me mainly through my main source on Instagram, so I really appreciate that. Everyone who sends me stuff, sends me links, sends me reels, sends me links to articles. I appreciate it. Thank you very much for sending this stuff, because I can't be all over all news sources all the time, and sometimes I miss things. So really interesting things. And chances are, if you find it interesting, I probably do too. Red meat sector, 2/3 of the way to net zero emissions, but significant investment still needed. This coming out of ABC News, which is our government mouthpiece. Is it though? No, it's our publicly funded news source in Australia. So they basically came out and said, hey, look, the red meat industry, they're 2/3 of the way to getting to net zero, and we got to get net zero, zero carbon. We got to get it out of there. Why are we 2/3 of the way there? That was the first thing. I'm like, are we really? What have we changed? What is different? Turns out that there was a drop off in stock, as I have talked about in the past. And if you're an Aussie, you should have been well aware of. Previous to 2020, there was a huge drought that we had, and that meant that stock within the red meat sector had to get killed off wholesale and sold off wholesale. So we had a destocking event that happened there. Huge destocking event. Less red meat, less cows, basically out there. Yeah, less cows means less emissions. But we're rebuilding now. Farmers are going to rebuild those stocks, and meat prices aren't dropping, they're increasing, which is increasing. Like, you've got increased demand, so then supply will rush to catch up. So these emissions going to go up. The emission gods or the climate change freaker people are sitting there going like, oh, we're 2/3 of the way there, so we can do this. We can get to net zero in our red meat industry. We're just almost there. Just looking as a cursory glance at this, I'm like, we're not almost there. We're about to start going the other way as we increase our red meat stocks. Now, how are they going to get the other third of the way there? This is the part that disturbs me. This is the geoengineering stuff. So I labeled this one for the folk on YouTube and the audio version of this as geoengineering madness. And this is part of it, geoengineering madness. They're going to change the feed. We're going to do it by changing what we feed. We're going to put stuff into the feed. I looked through this story and I'm like, what stuff? What are you putting into the feed? And they were not solid on what they're putting in there. They're changing the feed though. Like, I need to really go into this and research it a bit further. There was some stuff in there. I'm like, that's not enough information for me. So I'm going to look into this. What is this change to the feed of livestock? You're changing what goes into the thing that I eat. That disturbs me, and that should disturb you too. If you're a red meat eater, then this should be a bit concerning for you. Why are they changing what they eat? And I've kind of glossed over my whole point of this at the very start. These things that have lived on this earth for hundreds of thousands of years in their current form. I mean, yeah, I'd say probably hundreds of thousands of years in their roughly current form. These animals that we eat, ruminant animals, hoofed animals, cows, sheep, goats, kangaroo, whatever red meat you decide to eat. These sorts of things, animals, have been kicking around here, and there hasn't been a climate disaster. Why are we targeting them now? It's like the climate disaster problem, it's cows, right? No, what madness is this? Why are we focusing on this part of it? Why are we fucking with our food system? Leave the food system alone. Let's find somewhere else. If you really want to do it, let's find somewhere else to do it. Despite the fact that it's probably all a moot point anyway. All right, this coming out of the Wall Street Journal. Supercharging nature to suck carbon from the air. Fast-growing trees, volcanic dust, ocean tweaks. Startups get creative in efforts to fight global warming. Reducing emissions won't be enough to reach international goals for limiting global warming, many climate experts say. Mark that, global warming. It will also require removing billions of tons of carbon dioxide from the air every year. I like how they've conveniently whipped out global warming again when they like backpedaled away from that very hard. Little snapshot for younger folk out there. In the 80s, it was all about global cooling. We were worried about an ice age, and we were worried about it because of a thing called CFCs in our hairspray. People had fantastic hair, big perms in the 80s, lots of slicked hair. It was great. It was awesome. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go look up a Poison film clip, look up Bon Jovi. You'll start to understand what I'm talking about. The hair was amazing, but we all used way too much hairspray, and the CFCs were going to kill us. Holes in the ozone layer and such what. So we fought against it, big campaign, got rid of the hairspray, chopped off our hair, and what? No more global cooling. Instead, now it's global warming. Yes, we're heating up the earth and we're all going to die in greenhouse with greenhouse gases. However, then they started to look at that and go, well, that doesn't 100% look, the models that we're looking at don't 100% fit what the actual patterns are right now. So let's just call it climate change. All right, we can agree on that. Climate's change. I agree on that. But now they're saying conveniently, global warming, it's back out again. So we've got to fix this. We've got to fix this. How are we going to fix this? We're going to put particulate matter into the atmosphere. Here's another story. EU looks into blocking out the sun as climate change efforts falter. The European Union will join an international effort to assess whether large-scale interventions such as deflecting the sun's rays or changing the Earth's weather patterns are viable options for fighting climate change. So why did I explain this little story about how I grew up in the 80s and we had hairspray back then? It was because this is what we were worried about. Too much particulate matter in the atmosphere that was going to reflect the sun's rays and cool down the earth too much and send us into another ice age. And now we're looking at doing that. I feel like I'm living in a fucking sci-fi right now. Sometimes I read this stuff and I'm like, this is wild. How are they getting away with this? And this is the problem, that we've increasingly as individuals giving our energy and our power away to government entities, to the European. They're smarter than us. They know more than us. They've got access to better science than us. Trust, capital T, the capital S, science, TM, and we will be saved by them. This is the point, like, as if we haven't crossed enough lines yet. This is yet another one of those points where we need to dig our heels in, gang, and go like, yo, that's not all right. This is not all right. Do not geoengineer the earth. All right. There are other ways around it. Even if I'm wrong and, this horrific climate change thing does happen. I mean, not that I don't think it won't happen. I think it will happen. I think the climate does change. I think the way we're going about stopping it is very wrong. I'm kind of more of the opinion of, hey, let it go. Let it happen. If it's going to happen, let it happen. On a long enough timeline, things sort themselves out in nature. That's one thing. I've spent a lot of time out in nature and observed nature and seeing how it interacts and how it moves. And I truly believe on a long enough timeline, it doesn't reach equilibrium. It reaches dynamic equilibrium, in that there are ups and downs, there are peaks and troughs, and it continues doing that. And it will continue doing that with or without humans, but it will continue to do that. However, humans are adaptable creatures and we will be able to adapt to whatever is thrown at us. This is an Australian, but Health Canada is banning natural supplements, including herbs, putting naturopaths out of business. So growing herbs is a good idea. As a herbalist, I find that interesting, says Kira Leaf on Instagram. Thank you very much for that information, Kira Leaf. And yes, I totally agree with you. Like 100%. And we should all, like, I love that you said there, I'm a herbalist. I find this interesting. I long to be a herbalist. I have many books about herbs and their uses, and I try and grow a little bit of herbs here and there, and quite often fail. Some do better than others in the climate that I'm in. We should all be doing this. And it's one thing that I always tell people, like, all right, yeah, you can't grow all the, I don't know if you eat bread or something, wheat that you need to feed your family if you live roughly like most Australians live. It's difficult. You need a lot of land. You need a lot of resources to do that. Hey, if you live in an apartment, you can grow herbs though, and grow herbs. That's something that's going to heal you. That's something that's going to add to your food. And that's something that is going to potentially heal others as well and help others. So just do it. But it also gets you into the practice of gardening and growing herbs. All right. It's the onboarding into gardening. It's the gateway drug to, gardening, getting into it. And Kira Leaf also says we just need more trees. Fun fact, actually, I was reading this guy who, sorry, I was watching a video of a guy, and he was talking about how he had a look at the science for carbon in particular, and he said Australia. I'm probably messing the numbers up, but I'll get it roughly in the ballpark here. Australia has apparently, if we have to listen to the experts on this one, and this because we can't test it ourselves, 473 million tons of carbon. That's how much Australia produces every year. That's bad, right? With trees in Australia, they would convert carbon into oxygen at around somewhere between 420 to 430 million tons a year. Just the trees. Okay, that makes it seem a little bit better now, doesn't it? Doesn't seem like we're doing too bad of a job. Doesn't include things like mangroves. So we're talking about trees there. We're talking about forested area. When we start to talk about transitional spaces, as in water coming into land and things like that, and we look at mangroves and what they actually do, well, that blows it out of the water. That's not a pun, but that blows it out of the water. And all of a sudden, you start to look at it and you go, actually, are we already net zero despite what we're doing? Are we actually in the black by a long way here? Maybe we are. Maybe we're not doing as bad as we are. But I do agree with you, Kira Leaf, that yes, we just need more trees. Absolutely. Let's continue planting trees and other things as well. Norman Lacey says he released billions of GMO mosquitoes in those areas. I think YouTube's doing what YouTube does and is cutting out a bunch of comments here because that's the first comment that I can see. Renee C says, wasn't that on Futurama? Yes, I think also some of these things that I'm talking about here with this geoengineering, Snowpiercer, for example. That's why I feel like I'm in a sci-fi novel at the moment, right at the start, where they were trying to fix something. Speaking about mosquitoes, there is apparently an outbreak of a number of diseases that's going on at the moment, and a number of diseases that people are not necessarily the vector for. As in, let me try and wrap this up. Malaria. Malaria is a mosquito-borne disease, but if we have a human travel to an area that has malaria and gets infected with malaria, then they can potentially bring that back to another area. And the human cannot affect, but if a mosquito then was to take on the right type of mosquito, and this is why it doesn't work very well, because there's only certain types of mosquitoes that can carry malaria or dengue fever or blah, blah, blah. Now, if that particular type of mosquito happened to be in that area and then got that malaria from that person, then could spread it to others. However, like I said, that type of mosquito don't generally see in other areas unless that climate starts to change, right? Well, we've seen outbreaks of malaria, not outbreaks, but cases of malaria start to pop up in the US, apparently from people who have not traveled to malaria locations, or have not traveled outside of the US, in fact. So that's interesting. I think smallpox was also thrown in there, and there's one other disease that started popping up. So that's some interesting stuff to keep your eye on. More pandemics, more diseases. All right, short and sweet today, but I've got to go get myself ready for work to teach people how to be safe when they go to dangerous areas, apparently. Fun stuff, hey? I hope you've all been well. I am looking at... I'm trying to organize. I've just got a lot of things going on in my life at the moment. I can't just do this, as fun as it is. I'm looking at changing the format a little bit. So doing more formal educational videos, doing more testing of equipment videos. And when it comes to this sort of stuff, kind of just picking one story and pulling it apart and doing a little bit of research and a little more effort into it and actually creating a video. But I won't do it live. And then maybe doing this live one, maybe once a week or something like that. All this requires time, obviously. And time is a valuable resource, which I find myself with, I mean, I've got a lot of time. I've got as much time as anyone else, but where we choose to spend our time is the most important thing. And I try and choose to spend it with my family, first and foremost. I think that's the most important thing. I think if more people did that, then we might have more happier, more well-rounded human beings and probably a better world across the board. But anyway, that's my thoughts on that. Thank you very much for joining me. As always, stay safe, keep your eyes open to what's going on around you in your own little world, and keep your eyes maybe a little less open to what's going on outside your world. Don't live through this screen here, okay? Don't sit here staring at it all day and worry about what students are doing in US and whether they've got kitty litter in their classrooms or not. If that doesn't affect you, maybe don't worry about it so much. Worry about looking after the herbs in your kitchen. There you go. That's what your homework is for today. Get some herbs, get a little pot, get some soil, get some herbs, maybe some basil or some oregano or oregano if you're in the US, and grow that stuff. Look at it, smile, be happy, get some sunlight today. Keep up your preps, keep getting that food. That's never going to be something that you're going to regret. Get long-term food storage and keep getting it now, because food is still increasing in price despite what our government's trying to tell us, that it's slowing down, inflation is slowing down, and that food prices are coming down. Anecdotally, I think that's a total lie, because it's going up to me. But anyway, if you can store food, you can buy food now. When you eat that food, it will be a saving. So think of it as a savings account. All right, gang. Thank you very much, as always. Until next time, Semper Paratus.